Hey there, music lovers. Today we're unveiling the remarkable story of Charlie Rich, a young Arkansas farm boy who nearly lost his life at age 3, only to grow up blending gospel, jazz, and blues into a country music legacy that still leaves audiences in awe. From his heartfelt piano chords, learned at his mother's side, to his groundbreaking hits, like Behind Closed Doors, Charlie Rich's journey is a tale of talent, triumph, and a few legendary missteps along the way. Buckle up for an unforgettable look at the silver fox whose voice transcended genres and captured hearts for generations. In Colt, Arkansas, on December 14, 1932, Charlie Rich came into the world. He was born into a deeply religious, hard-working Baptist household at a time when farmland and church pews formed the foundation of daily life for many in the South. His father, Vernon Rich, spent his days tending cotton fields under a wide and often relentless sun. His mother, Helen Rich, served as a church organist and thus was, in many ways, the first witness to her son's musical gifts. The family lived in a so-called dry county, meaning alcohol was restricted, though that didn't quite stop Charlie from hearing the hushed strains of certain blues records whenever they managed to filter in. Folks would pass around these clandestine records, and Charlie, even as a toddler, found himself entranced by the earthy rhythms and raw feeling they contained. That sense of being both enthralled and curious stayed with him throughout his life. And when he was only 3 years old, pneumonia almost took him away forever. He'd lie still, terrified, and struggling to breathe. In that harrowing span, gospel melodies and jazz chords, often brought to him through his mother's instrument, became something like a spiritual medicine, a kind of magical balm that fueled an early, unbreakable attachment to music. Growing up, Charlie inhaled the harmonies of the Baptist church with a zeal that only a child might possess. But it wasn't just the Sunday services shaping his ear. He fell in love with gospel, yes, and that imprint would never fully leave him. Yet the pull of the blues and jazz was just as strong, and perhaps a bit more mischievous. There's an anecdote from a 1975 country music magazine interview excerpt that recounts how Helen would show people her son's ability to pick out gospel tunes by ear when he was about 4. She'd say, "He hears it all, he soaks it up," and Charlie indeed seemed to have a sponge-like capacity for any musical style that came his way. By his teenage years, big band jazz programs still occasionally aired across rural radio stations, especially in those transitional post-World War II days, and Charlie would huddle close to the radio, straining to pick up those signals. Friends from Central High School in Memphis often said that Charlie could toggle between instruments, saxophone, guitar, piano, without missing a beat. The Memphis Press Scimitar, a local paper, ran a tiny piece at one point referring to him as the boy who just can't choose a favorite instrument. And that was as literal as it gets. He wanted them all, and he wanted to blend every genre that spoke to him. Pain had a way of finding him early, too. In 1948, his older sister Betty passed away after battling leukemia, which in the late 1940s was far more devastating than it might be today. The entire family's heartbreak carved an even deeper well of emotion in Charlie. At times, especially late at night when everyone else was asleep, he would sit at the piano and let slow gospel chords resonate through the house. Family friends recalled in later interviews how they'd hear the notes trickling out of open windows, carrying a sadness but also a strange form of comfort. That grief, coupled with a near-death illness he survived as a toddler, became part of the emotional tapestry that wove into his music. Many people say that's why his ballads had a certain vulnerability that set him apart. Charlie did a short stint at the University of Arkansas, hoping maybe he could keep up some formal study while still indulging his love of music on the side. But higher education wasn't exactly where his heart thrived, and at 21, in 1953, he decided to enlist in the United States Air Force. This move, though seemingly a detour from his blossoming musical career, actually ended up sharpening his skills in unexpected ways. From 1953 to 1956, he served in the Air Force and played in a band that some niche music historians refer to as the Velvetones, performing jazz standards and sprinkling in a bit of country flair for variety. It's even been suggested on certain fan-run blogs that the Velvetones occasionally tried out a few original compositions of Charlie's, giving him a safe space to experiment with chord structures and melodies in front of a live, though modest audience of fellow servicemen. The discipline of the military, he later hinted in a rarely cited interview, taught him punctuality and the value of practice, qualities that would come in handy when he moved into the rigorous world of recording sessions. But the real story of Charlie's personal life begins just before he left for the Air Force. In 1950, while still a student at Central High School in Memphis, he met a young woman named Margaret Ann Green. Every recollection, including Margaret Ann's own words in a 1987 Country Weekly piece, describes the encounter as electric. She had a knack for songwriting, a sharp wit, and a spirit that matched Charlie's creative ambitions. 2 years later, on May 25, 1952, they were married. He was 19, brimming with a dream of making music his lifelong endeavor, and she stood right beside him, wholeheartedly believing in that future. When he finally returned to civilian life in 1956, they settled briefly in Memphis before moving to Benton, Arkansas, building a home that quickly filled up with 4 children: Cheryl, 1953, Alan, 1955, Lori, 1957, and Jack, 1960. Music was a near constant presence in their household. Not only was Charlie perfecting his craft and writing new material, but Margaret Ann also proved herself as a gifted songwriter, co-authoring Life Has Its Little Ups and Downs, released in 1969, and A Very Special Love Song, 1974, among others. In later years, fans would often remark how those songs carried a distinctly personal tone, given that husband and wife had worked on them together. Back in Memphis, Charlie returned to a city that was absolutely buzzing with musical fervor in the late 1950s. The rockabilly sound was riding high, propelled by the colossal success of Elvis Presley, Jerry Lee Lewis, Carl Perkins, Johnny Cash, and Roy Orbison. Sun Records, helmed by the visionary Sam Phillips, was like a gravitational center pulling in talented musicians from all corners, each hoping to be the next big thing. Charlie Rich found his way into this lively scene by gigging in local clubs, playing piano, and occasionally sliding in some original compositions whenever a band leader would let him. One night in 1958, Sam Phillips noticed the way Charlie played with a mix of country authenticity, jazzy chords, and soulful undertones. Before long, Charlie was doing session work at Sun, contributing to classic tracks like Jerry Lee Lewis's iconic Great Balls of Fire. There's a well-known anecdote that's been echoed in interviews with session musicians of the time. Jerry Lee Lewis, never short on confidence, apparently recognized that Charlie had something special behind the keys, praising him between takes for how effortlessly he could move from a gospel run to a boogie-woogie riff. That range, spanning multiple genres, was precisely what Sam Phillips believed could set Charlie apart as a star in his own right. In 1960, Charlie recorded Whirlwind, his first single on Sun Records. It didn't go anywhere significant on the charts, but it confirmed in Phillips's mind that Charlie's strongest suit was going to be songwriting as much as performing. Soon that faith was rewarded with Lonely Weekends, also released in 1960, which managed to crack the Pop Top 30 by reaching number 22, Mind you, crossing over onto the pop charts was no small feat back then, especially for a relatively new artist who was merging country textures with a smoky, almost jazz-like vocal style. The magazine Billboard picked up on this uniqueness, calling him a country crooner with a touch of jazz. The success wasn't massive yet, but it was big enough to open doors at bigger labels. We know from various discographies and music historian accounts that Charlie eventually wanted more creative and promotional support than Sun could give him. And so he embarked on a series of label moves. By 1963, he was at RCA Victor, though the fit wasn't exactly seamless. He then jumped to Smash Mercury, where he finally nabbed a moderate hit called Big Boss Man in 1965, hitting number 1, 25 on the country charts. Collectors talk about the scarcity of some of those early vinyl pressings, describing how fans realized even then that Charlie had the makings of a major star, even if the mainstream hadn't fully caught on. But the biggest pivot in his trajectory happened in 1967 when he met Billy Sherrill at Epic Records. Sherrill was among the architects of the countrypolitan sound, layering lush orchestral arrangements over raw country songwriting. The synergy between Sherrill's style and Charlie's eclectic approach was, as they say, a match made in heaven. In 1973, their combined efforts yielded the album Behind Closed Doors, which turned Charlie from a respected artist into a household name. The title track, Behind Closed Doors, rocketed to number 1 on the country charts, simultaneously reaching number 1, 15 on pop lists. Riding that wave of success, The Most Beautiful Girl emerged, hitting number 1 on both the country and pop charts, and eventually selling over 2 million copies. The year 1973 became a banner one for Charlie's trophy shelf. He snagged the CMA Award for Album of the Year, and in 1974, he was named the CMA's Male Vocalist of the Year. That same period brought him a Grammy for Best Male Country Vocal Performance for Behind Closed Doors. In the eyes of the industry, Charlie Rich was finally living up to the potential that Sam Phillips had spotted years earlier in Memphis. Critics, fans, and the general public all seemed smitten by his style. Rolling Stone, particularly in issues from around 1974 to 75, lauded him for the emotional depth of his vocals, occasionally placing him on par with the soulful intensity of Ray Charles. High praise indeed. Television shows clamored to book him. Hee Haw, The Mike Douglas Show, and various primetime specials where mainstream America fell in love, not just with his velvety voice, but also with his prematurely silver hair, which earned him the now iconic moniker Silver Fox. He churned out multiple number 1 country hits through the mid-1970s, including There Won't Be Any More and Rollin' with the Flow, bridging the gap between a more traditional country audience and the pop crossover market. By the time 1975 rolled around, Charlie was sitting pretty at the pinnacle of success. But success sometimes magnifies our inner demons, and Charlie's demon was alcoholism, a struggle dating back to the 1960s. People close to him often mention that the more his fame soared, the heavier he drank. That all came to a head at the 1975 Country Music Association CMA Awards. Now, if you bring up Charlie Rich and a group of veteran country music fans, it won't be long before someone references that infamous incident. He walked on stage to present the Entertainer of the Year award, inebriated enough that it was visible to the entire audience. Then, reading the winner's name, John Denver, he pulled out a cigarette lighter and set the envelope on fire. Some read it as a bizarre comedic protest. Others felt it was a drunken jab at Denver's perceived pop-friendly style, overshadowing more authentic country acts. And still others simply saw it as a meltdown. In any case, The fiasco dominated headlines in the Tennessean and other major outlets, overshadowing any celebratory notes of the evening. That single moment cast a long shadow over Charlie's career. It led to blacklisting from some concert venues and radio stations, though not universally. People in Nashville whispered that it was a career changer, but ironically, it also underscored how potent Charlie's presence had become. If he'd been less famous, the uproar wouldn't have loomed so large. Margaret Ann Rich stepped in to support him through the turmoil. A personal friend of the family once wrote on a Charlie Rich fan forum that Margaret Ann initiated a plan to help Charlie get sober. By 1980, he had reportedly beaten his addiction, attributing the victory largely to his wife's unwavering dedication. While he managed to keep recording and performing, the latter half of the 1970s and beyond saw Charlie grappling with label conflicts. Epic, for instance, wanted him to push further into crossover territory, a direction Charlie didn't always relish. He felt torn between the more stripped-down, sometimes jazz-inflected music he aspired to record, and the radio-friendly hits Epic was encouraging. Eventually, those creative tensions led him to part ways with the label. As the new decade dawned, the 1980s ushered in the neo-traditionalist wave of country, with artists like George Strait, Randy Travis, and Ricky Skaggs bringing back a purer honky-tonk vibe. Charlie's smooth country-politan style began to sound a bit out of place in the shifting commercial landscape. He moved to smaller labels. Sire was one of them, where he hoped to recapture some artistic freedom and indulge more in the jazz influences that had shaped him since childhood. Mainstream country chart success became increasingly elusive. Nonetheless, critics and a core group of steadfast fans never forgot what he was capable of. In 1992, he released Pictures and Paintings, an album that some critics now describe as a lost gem in his catalog. It had a pronounced jazz flavor, hearkening back to those early days of melding gospel chords, smoky lounge vibes, and country undertones into a single tapestry. Rolling Stone gave it a mention, describing how Charlie's voice sounded particularly poignant in those stripped-back, jazz-leaning arrangements, even though the album's commercial performance was modest at best. Pictures and Paintings did chart briefly, reaching number 1, 62 on the country rankings, but in the bigger scheme, it barely made a commercial ripple. Still, for a man who had spent decades at the crossroads of multiple genres, the album felt like a homecoming. Interviews from the time suggest Charlie himself cherished the creative liberty he found making it. He was in his late 50s then, with a lifetime of achievements and controversies behind him. So this felt like a chance to circle back and record an album that truly reflected the complexities of his musical soul. A short promotional tour followed, with fans remarking how comfortable he seemed performing pieces of that record in smaller, more intimate venues. Then came July 25th, 1995, a day that would break the hearts of everyone who had followed Charlie's storied life and career. While traveling through Louisiana with Margaret Ann, he stopped at a motel in Hammond. There, a sudden blood clot in his lung took him away at just 62 years of age. Early press reports contained speculation, some unkind, about possible relapse or foul play, but an official investigation concluded the obvious. It was a natural and tragic event. He was cremated, and his ashes were scattered in Arkansas, the state that had given him both the cotton fields and the early gospel heritage that shaped his earliest inclinations toward music. Margaret Ann, who had been his sidekick and creative partner for 43 years, survived him until her own passing in 2010, preserving his memory and sharing stories that only a wife truly knows. By that time, Charlie had amassed 47 charted singles, including a dazzling 12 that climbed to number 1, and he'd sold over 10 million records. In 1995, soon after his death, he was rightfully inducted into the Country Music Hall of Fame. The ceremony was filled with tributes, and though some critics voiced that he deserved even earlier recognition, the induction sealed his legacy among the pantheon of country music legends. Internet forums and fan websites, especially once the internet became more mainstream, popped up and traded lore about his early recordings, unreleased demos rumored to be hiding in private collections, and the behind-the-scenes stories from that golden era of Memphis music. While the flamboyant personalities of Jerry Lee Lewis, Elvis Presley, and Johnny Cash continue to dominate many discussions of the Sun Records legacy, Charlie's fans never fail to highlight his unique artistry. They'll tell you that unlike the others, Charlie seamlessly traversed 5 or 6 musical worlds at once, and that's what made him so special. His children, notably Alan Rich, have kept that musical spark alive over the years. Alan has performed his father's songs at tribute shows, sometimes sharing the stage with big names like Vince Gill, who publicly praised Charlie for bridging the gap between country and pop back in the 70s. There was also talk in the late 90s and early 2000s about potential unreleased recordings that might see the light of day, fragments or entire tracks stowed away in studio vaults. Occasionally, a track or two would appear on a compilation, sending longtime aficionados into excitement. Blog posts and fan discussions would dissect each note, each nuanced phrase, trying to glean new insights into the full breadth of Charlie's talent. In 2024, nearly 3 decades after Charlie's passing, a reissue of Behind Closed Doors soared to the top of the country charts again, a testament to the album's timeless charm. If you look at the streaming data from 2025, numbers that industry professionals and fans both cited on social media, you'll find that Behind Closed Doors, The Most Beautiful Girl, and Rollin' with the Flow all enjoyed notable spikes in popularity. It wasn't just longtime listeners revisiting old favorites. Younger audiences were discovering him for the first time, often hooked by the soulful glint in his voice. Many of these new fans turned to social media to express their astonishment at how seamlessly he wove together country's storytelling, jazz's improvisational flair, blues's emotional grit, and gospel's spiritual depth. Modern artists, too, those unafraid to incorporate R&B or jazz elements into their country repertoire, have repeatedly cited Charlie Rich as a prime example of defying genre boundaries while retaining heartfelt authenticity.